Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Zoom. My guest this evening is a award-winning scientist. In fact, the Asian Scientist Awards has got 5 Sri Lankans on here, and we've got one of them with us on the program this evening, and it's none other than Mr. Rohan Pethiyagoda. Very good evening to you, Rohan, and welcome to the program.
You too, Faraz. Nice talking to you.
And Asian Scientist Awards, I mean, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5. 5 people have won this thing, or sort of been acknowledged. Chaturanga Ranasinghe, Ashini Ranatunga, Asha Divos, Chandana Jayaratna, and Rohan Pethiyagoda. What on earth have you had to do to be so much, so awarded? What is it? It's an absolute, it's brilliant that all you Sri Lankans have been sort of recognized in the top 100 in Asia.
It's very gratifying for us, but there are 2 things I need to point out. First off, I'm the only one in that 5 who doesn't have a PhD. I'm just Mr. Rohan Pethiyagoda, whereas everyone else is a very accomplished scientist. And the second thing is, I feel a little burden here that you're interviewing me and not the other 5 or the other 4. So I think it'll be nice to try and recognize the contributions of the others on this occasion, because I think you've interviewed me many times, and I think the public are more aware of what I've been doing because of the publicity associated with my work, and maybe not so much the work of the others. I mean, Dr. Ranasinghe, for example, Chaturanga Ranasinghe, very unusual. First, I mean, he's on the Olympic Committee, and he's a sports physiologist, if you like. He's a medical doctor, specializing in exercise medicine, something that we all need if we're going to stay healthy. And he's a lecturer at the Department of Allied and Health Sciences in the University of Colombo. And his work is just quite incredible. He's got a highly cited article, for example, on the relationship between BMI, body mass index. You know, body mass index basically says what our weight is in relation to our height. And if that ratio is too much, it means we're obese and we come into risk categories for things like diabetes. But he did an interesting study across more than 1,000 people, whom he measured the body mass index on the one hand, and on the other, he looked at actually how much fat did they have. There's machines that can detect fat in your body. And then he found that actually body mass index and fat content by this method, method that he used, correlates very carefully, very highly for men and extremely highly for women. So a woman's fat content would be very closely correlated with her BMI. A wonderful finding. Many people have cited this. Almost 100 other scientists all over the world have cited this work. And I guess that's part of the reason why he was selected in the first place for the award that he won. Another person who was recognized by these awards is Dr. Ashani Ranatunga, and she's a civil engineer. Now, you need to recognize that the number of women engineers, not just in Sri Lanka, but in the world, is quite small. It's only about 30% of engineers that are women now. The proportion used to be much smaller before. And she's in a difficult outdoors kind of engineering, geotechnical engineering, which is a subspecialty of civil engineering. And her specialty is ash. If you think about it, lots of processes that we use in industry now, like coal-fired power stations, the combustion of rice husk and maize kernels, you know, the cob of corn, which are waste products, are used in combustion, for example, for making electricity. And these generate thousands of tons of ash, which you've got nothing to do with. And so what Ashani has been doing is researching ways of using this ash as a building material for the foundations of buildings that are made on soft soil. A fantastic innovation. Who'd have thought it?
Absolutely, absolutely fantastic.
And so like this kind of work doesn't really get recognized very much in Sri Lanka. And this gives an occasion, these awards or the recognition of Asian scientists give an occasion to recognize the contributions of people like Ashani and Dr. Chaturanga Ramasinghe, in addition, of course, to others. And then we have Asha De Vos, who's very well known. She's a highly celebrated scientist overseas. I think she's probably much better known than I am. We both have somewhat public profiles because we're on the lecture circuit. Asha much more than I am. And even her work was absolutely spectacular. Her PhD, I think, which she finished in around 2012 or 2013, was looking at why southern Sri Lanka has so many blue whales, so many whales altogether. And she did an incredible body of work, bringing together factors like the wind over a 3-year period. This is the wind, tides, ocean currents, ocean surface temperatures, the nutrient content of the water, and so on. And she showed that in the summer months especially, in other words, during the northeast monsoon, there is a great upwelling of nutrients in southern Sri Lanka, this favorite Meris whale watching spot. And that the conditions there are just right for whales because all these different factors, like the monsoons, the sea surface temperatures, the tides and currents, combine to make conditions perfect for blue whales. And now Asha's done a lot of oceanographic research. She's been to many parts of the world on ocean research vessels, and she's also a great advocate for conservation of marine life in Sri Lanka. She's been working, for example, to get the shipping lane, which goes right through the area where the whales are concentrated in off the south coast of Sri Lanka. She's trying to get the shipping lanes moved further out to sea to reduce the risk of collision between whales and shipping, which is fantastic work, and that's getting some traction. I think it was largely to her that we have to owe the fact that I think it's the biggest shipping line in the world. Maersk have voluntarily now moved their ships out of the whaling region. And then I think the fourth person who was there was Professor Chandana Jayaratne of the University of Colombo. He's a physicist. I think he was recognized mainly by a local award that was given by the Organization of Professional Associations for a lifetime of teaching and pedagogy, I guess, is what you would say. So those are the four people who were recognized in this system, and I think it's a very august company for me to find myself in. Very humble.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's very very encouraging to note that in this ambience of a brain drain, and I'm told that it's a pretty serious brain drain, that at least there is also some brain retention.
Huge amount. Asha, for example, had been at the University of Leeds. She was lecturing there, and then she came back instead to work here in Katubadda in the University of Moratuwa and teach and research there. So there are lots of dedicated people whose focus is on Sri Lanka.
And so this brings me nicely into this next bit. We are told that there is this serious brain drain, so outflow. But there is also in these cases the opposite, the brain return, I call it. But why? What does the government have to do? Because it's always the government, isn't it? What does the government have to do to stop the brain drain?
Well, you can't, because internationally labor now is a market, and people will go to where the conditions are best. And most scientists who are at the peak of their careers would be in their late 30s or early 40s, which is the time that kids are needing education and so on. And so there's a lot of attraction to go to Western countries where they feel they can get a better education, a future for their children and such like. So I think the brain drain is not something we can prevent. I think the important thing is for government to fill the vacancies that occur. because for every scientist who goes, there are two more somewhere in the world getting their PhD and wanting to come back. In fact, all the students who pass through my hands, not many, but over the years, are seriously committed to working in Sri Lanka. And so I think the important thing is, rather than having this freeze on recruitment in the universities, which we've had for the past year or more, is when the universities lose people, especially in the sciences and engineering subjects or medicine, to fill those vacancies with people who are waiting to come back, mainly early career scientists, which is really good because early career people tend to be a lot more engaged in research and also tend to be, I think, better teachers if you listen to what the students are telling you.
But you know, if Sri Lanka were able to create an economy which provides plenty of opportunity and so on, and with none of these troubles that we are experiencing, these various challenges that we're going through, and with no end in sight. In fact, I want to ask you, what is the state of our nation at the moment in terms of politics? We had the Aragale, we had people asking for change. We had change of sorts. Now they're saying, look, you know, this president is only elected or appointed, he's not elected, and there are various challenges. So what is the state of affairs? Do you think that there'll be elections anytime soon? Or is President Wickremesinghe using his temporary term to set himself up for a potential victory or another full 5-year term in his own right, something that has eluded him his entire political career, a full term?
I'm sure he's going to try for that. And the thing is, Faraz, if you remember the last time I was on your show, I think that was in February, around the time of independence, and you were rather cross with me because I said that things are getting better under Ranil Wickremesinghe. Now, before I get all the hate mail from your viewers, I must say that I'm not a fan. I certainly think it was very repressive what he did with the young people who fought so hard and bravely and peacefully to get rid of Gotabaya Rajapaksa last year. The most wonderful moment in our nation's post-election or post-independence history. And the suppression of that movement was very ugly, and I certainly don't approve of it. So I'm not condoning any of it. The fact is, who would have thought in July last year, when Gotabaya had to flee the country, and we were in chaos, interminable queues, shortages, people unable to get to work, people not having the money to buy basic necessities, that we would have come to this position of relative stability just 1 year later. It's quite incredible. I didn't expect it. And to that extent, I think Ranil Wickremesinghe deserves to be saluted because he brought some stability, largely by force, by methods that were not nice, by arresting people and agitators and students and so on. But the end result has been that we have a period of stability. We can catch our breath as a country and take stock before taking the brave decisions that we've got to take going forward into the next few years. Because remember, we aren't servicing debts. Since Ranil Wickremesinghe came in, we haven't paid back any of our loans. So the pile of debt is accumulated. $50 billion of foreign debt, and another $50 billion of local debt. Massive amounts. So how we're ever going to pay those off is anyone's guess. The fact is that problem hasn't gone away. We've just got a breathing space, an ability now to find out how we should plan the next steps. And I think that's where Ranil is holding the ace in his hands, because he's going to artificially keep things as happy as they are. So there's no shortages. Inflation, remember, has come down from more than 60% now to about 20%, according to the central bank's statistics last month. Our foreign reserves have gone up to almost $3 billion now. Middle East remittances are getting better all the time. So there's a lot of positive traction in the economy. And I think he's going to wait until it gets better and try to go for a presidential election. But there's a catch, because Article 31 of the Constitution doesn't let him. And so he's going to have to do some machinations. A little Machiavellian engineering is going to have to happen if he's going to do it.
I hear what you're saying. much of what you say is, of course, true. But, you know,
I take objection to that because I'd like to think that everything I say is true.
Well, I need to counter you, because what we are forgetting is that Sri Lanka is just living on other people's monies that we haven't paid. And so it doesn't take a Nandalal or a Cabral or a Kumaraswamy or Sunil Mendis or anybody like that. This is not magic. You don't pay your loans, you've got some money left behind, and you're using that money to pay for fuel and gas and so on. And in any case, the economy has contracted so much that the demand isn't as much as it was before. So these little things might go down well, you know, from a PR point of view or whatever it is. But the fact remains that Sri Lanka has got apparently no plan. What's the plan to recover? Why can't we recover today? Why is it that, you know, they're talking of all these sort of archaic and almost pre-Victorian laws about media, controlling the media. And our president says that, look, in Britain, we have the Press Complaints Commission and so on. But excuse me, the King of England, the Prime Minister of Britain, whoever it was, because we had so many in the last few months, or Parliament doesn't appoint the people who make up the Press Complaints Commission. So they are indeed really and truly independent. So who's he fooling? And who are all these politicians fooling? What is the lot of the people of Sri Lanka in the next 18 months? You know, we live in our education system is so-called free, so-called. Our National Health Service is so-called free. We've had to chuck away some medicines that was imported from India. Corruption is as robust as it ever was. So what is this difference that this appointed president has sorted us out, apart from, admittedly, no queues?
Well, the printing of money has slowed down. For example, this year, I think we've just printed about just over 250 billion rupees compared with 2.5 trillion, I believe, last year. So things definitely are looking up a little bit, but the systemic problem that underlies Sri Lanka and has underlain our economy ever since independence has been deficit spending. Every year, the government borrows more money from the markets to pay back last year's loans on the one hand, and then to finance this year's spending on the other. So this 2.5 trillion rupee deficit that we run every year, it's only getting more and more to fund free education, free health, a massive armed service, and so on, a massive public sector, is unaffordable. But you can't get rid of that overnight. So this has to be something that we wean ourselves out of. The other thing you mentioned about the media, for us, I completely agree with you, except that people all the time keep saying, oh, we need to be more like Singapore. And remember, Singapore doesn't have a free media. Singapore's media is highly curbed, highly controlled, albeit tacitly, by a set of government regulations. And no Singaporean media station, television station, or newspaper is going to print anything that's likely to irk the government. Now, is that something you're willing to forego in order to be more like Singapore? Do we insist that we will have absolute freedom in our media to criticize the government, to cause trouble, to announce public parades and so on? Now, I say, yes, we should have the freedom, but there are many who say, no, if you have too much freedom, then you can also destabilize society and bring about a kind of anarchical system like we had in the second half of last year. So this is a fine balance. And I think Ranil Wickremesinghe seems to have decided that he will be the arbiter of the balance. Question is, do you trust him to do an honest job?
Well, that is the question for nearly 16 million people who make up the voting composition in our country. What do you think, Rohan, if you were looking at it from a sort of political, analytical point of view? We have at various stages, JVP ekata rallak and SJB ekata rallak, and then some little tiny voice from somewhere down south will say, oh, SLPP ekata rallak, all this is all absolute rubbish, isn't it? Because we should really have an election and sort it out. But nevertheless, within the current scenario, what do you think will happen? Who will emerge?
So there are four principal forces in politics in Sri Lanka, and I think the largest monolithic one is now the JVP, the Compass Malimau, because they've got, I think, traction amongst the young people in the country and amongst the unions and working people. So I think they'll probably do much better than they've ever done in their history up to now, in terms of democratic elections. And then you have the SJB, which is the UNP of the past, dressed up in a different form, many of the same faces, led by Sajith, who's doing a superb job as leader of the opposition. The problem is there's always rumblings amongst SJB MPs about wanting to cross over to the government, because some of them are anxious to get portfolios, others of them feel that they don't get enough overhearing from Sajith, that he doesn't socialize with them. There's this problem, doesn't return calls, so that this kind of day-to-day angst. And then, of course, whatever anyone might say, has 20 to 35% of the vote, because the rural vote is very loyal to the Mahinda Rajapaksa brand. The question is, he can't be a candidate, and he might like to have his son Namal, who's now old enough, or his brother Basil, to come in as the next presidential candidate. I think Basil is now damaged goods. It'll be very difficult for him to sustain an election campaign because he's got a bad reputation. But Namal is an unknown quantity, and people like unknown quantities. So that must be very tempting to the Rajapaksa family. But on the other hand, it's very unlikely that they can win, because their brand was damaged as a result of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. So they might try to make a coalition with Ranil, so that there is a vote to a UNP, a coalition, a loose coalition, for the purpose of the presidential election, and they'll try and get him elected as president, because the fewer contenders you have for the presidency, the better your chances. So if it's a four-way split, the chances are very likely that the JVP will win. Even a three-way split, they have a good chance. If it's a two-way split, the JVP against the rest of the world, then I think the chances of the rest of the world are much better, especially because the minorities, the Tamil, Muslim, Catholic entities, tend to have more faith traditionally in Ranil Wickremesinghe, who quotes them very carefully, than they have in the other players in parliament. So traditionally, I mean, the thing is, there isn't a racist bone in Ranil Wickremesinghe's body. I've never heard him say a racist thing. I have worked closely with him in the past. I'm not going to work with him in the future, so I'm not looking for a job. I'm not saying nice things about him because I want anything. I certainly don't. I won't take it. So he has a public pledge. But the thing is, he's not a racist. He's not a person who's a bigot, who's divisive. So I think the minorities trust him to that extent. And he might try to put together a coalition and go for a premature election, which, as I said, he can't do according to the Constitution.
Let me stop you there, Rohan Pethiyagoda, and let's take a peek in this evening's headline news from that wonderful primetime news team up there on the third floor. And we'll be back after this short break with Rohan Pethiyagoda on Newsline Zoom.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
Did the mother who was anesthetized during childbirth lose her life due to the effects of a drug? No laboratories to ascertain the quality of drugs, a statement from the National Medicines Regulatory Authority. Trade unions claim that a cabinet decision revoked 2 conditions on foreign firms entering the local fuel market. The president is a miracle worker, says the UNP General Secretary. The next presidential candidate is from the SLPP. The president was supported to carry out only 2 responsibilities, reveals Professor Ranjit Bandara. Price of a loaf of bread reduced by 10 rupees. Aswasuma to replace Samruddhi starting next month.
සංචාරක හා හෝටල් ක්ෂේත්‍රයේ දෙස් විදෙස් රැකියා අපේක්ෂාවෙන් සිටින ඔබ වෙනුවෙන් MIM වෙතින් නවතම පාඨමාලා දෙකක්.
Certificate course in food and beverage, certificate course in kitchen.
මෙරට ප්‍රමුඛ පෙළේ හෝටල් තුළ ප්‍රායෝගික පුහුණුව සමග සුපවේදය පිළිබඳ ඔබේ කුසලතා ඔප්නංවා ගැනීමට අවස්ථාව.
Call 076 8822 707 now. Register via www.mim.lk. MIM Fox Faculty.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm in conversation with Rohan, Pethiyagoda, and we're discussing the state of the nation. Thank you, Rohan, for that explanation. But honestly, when we're talking about Namal Rajapaksa, he's in his sort of mid to late 30s, and surely the youth in this country, when we take Aragalaya and so on and so forth. Aragalaya, of course, wasn't only the youth; there was everybody there. But the youth in this country surely can relate more to a person of their kind of age group, as in Namal Rajapaksa, as opposed to various old fossils, if you like, who are past their 70s and approaching their 80s. I don't know what on earth the Americans are doing with that old president there, but still, in Sri Lanka, don't you think that when the people are looking for change, that they need to be looking at more youthful characters to bring out new thinking and a new dynamic, really?
Sure, I completely agree. I'd love to see more young people in politics, at the top of politics. We've seen people like Tony Blair and Barack Obama come into office in their mid-40s and being really good leaders of difficult countries and getting re-elected time and time again. So there's a lot to be said for youth. How that will fly in Sri Lanka, I'm not so sure, because we have a tradition in this country of not having young leaders. People tend to overstay their welcomes in politics, going into their 70s or 80s even, like they are in America, as you mentioned, with Donald Trump and Joe Biden. People basically who can hardly think or walk.
If they keep falling over as well.
I know, it's a little embarrassing. So I hope that doesn't happen here. But I think the problem is that in Sri Lanka, so much power is concentrated in the hands of the president, that the president has a lot of authority when it comes to doing house deals, house trading. And remember, Ranil Wickremesinghe is a master at this game. He's been in this game for the past more than 30 years. And so I think he knows very well how to align the forces of politics so as to get himself a first term. Remember, he's not serving his first term at the moment. This is term 0 because he's finishing Gotabaya. So he's going to try and get elected in his own right so that he can be his own president. Remember, since he came into office, he's not really had an opportunity to bring any of his favorites into government. He's stuck with the Potur cabinet largely. And there is a lot of struggle amongst his UNP loyalists to get into government. So he's got to throw some crumbs in their direction as well. He can't do that now because he doesn't have the authority. Once he gets elected, all that changes. But for him to get elected, there is a dynamic that you need to be conscious of. I'm talking like some kind of political pundit, which I'm not, because you brought me here under false pretenses to talk about science, and we're talking about politics. Anyway,
well,
it's
we said we'll talk a little bit about that because it's part of the whole brain drain thing, and it leads nicely to what we are talking about.
Sure. But the thing is, for us, Article 31 of the Constitution doesn't let this president call an early election. He's got to run the whole term. And so the election commission decides when the next presidential election is. And he has to have it within 6 weeks of the 18th of November. I mean, 6 weeks prior. So it'll probably be sometime in the end of September that elections will be called. Now, when that happens, Ranil Wickremesinghe has lost a lot of his authority because towards the end of your term, you become something of a lame duck. Also, by the time that happens, there'll be more and more pressure from our creditors for us to start servicing our debt. Because remember, we've been ducking doing this since the 12th of April last year. We've dodged paying back any of our debts. The restructuring is still on hold, and this can't go on forever. So we'll come under some serious pressure, and one or two of our creditors may well go to court in Western countries to force us to pay our debts. I think the president will want to avoid all. So if it looks like he's going to get squeezed into a corner in debt servicing, and remember, when you start servicing debt, it means finding another $5 or $6 billion every year, which is a lot of money for him to find locally from taxation and so on. And so that will inevitably lead to a further devaluation of the rupee and another phase of high inflation. So to avoid all that, I think it must be very tempting to have an election either at the end of this year or early next year, for which you'll have to go to Parliament and seek to revise, I think it's section or Article 40 of the Constitution that preclude him from having calling an early election. So he probably will do that. And who in Parliament is going to put their hands up and say, no, I don't want an election, presidential election? They'll all vote for it. So I think it can be facilitated, but he can't do it by surprise, which is what he'd most likely like to do, is so that we wake up one morning and find that he's called a snap election. He can't do that. He's got to do it the hard way. So I think early next year, if not even at the end of this year, once inflation is down to 10%, which it's heading towards, once interest rates have come down to the mid-teens, I think he can easily say he's returned the country to the status quo ante. In other words, the status of the country at 2019. And so the damage done by Gotabaya has now been undone. And Ranil is going to go around the country and say, if I did all that in just 1 year, watch what I can do over 5 years. So give me another chance. So I think that's going to be the rhetoric that we're going to hear from the president's office as the end of this year comes up.
And I suppose the president's office will not make any reference to the fact that more money was borrowed during the Yapalini government in terms of foreign borrowings than in any other government. But that's another story for another day. Later this week, our fabulous guests like Rohan Pethiyagoda will include the likes of Faiz Mustafa, Ravi Karananayake, and others. But Rohan, what kind of we can't be looking even westward for any inspiration, our youth, because just look at it. In the United States, we've had the former president now being charged under very serious offenses, and so on, for hiding nuclear secrets and so on. Oh my God. And then in Britain, we have a former prime minister who's been chucked out of who left Parliament, and they've now voted to take away his pass, so he can't even come and use the bar or the library over there. And so these people have been caught out lying. This is from the Western world. Who are they? Youth will rightly say to lecture us and so on. And God forbid that it was. That various state secrets were found in the back room at Carlton in Tangol, or in Ranil's house in Fifth Lane, or wherever it was. So where can our youth look for inspiration?
I think the inspiration is to be found in themselves. As I alluded to already, to me, the greatest moment in my life looking at politics was the eviction peacefully last year of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. To me, that was a beautiful moment. It was done by young people protesting peacefully, of course, a little threateningly, certainly not the kind of bloodshed and riots that one would normally have associated with the ouster of a president in a country in which the presidency is so strong and powerful. So I don't see that really as all negative. But there are things that I worry about in our approach to the West, which you just mentioned, because I'm disappointed that Ranil Wickremesinghe is so West-centric when we get so little from the West. India has been our closest friend through this trial over the last 2 years. And as far as I know, the president still hasn't made a state visit to India. Maybe he hasn't been invited, but this certainly sticks out. And I don't see the foreign minister spending much time in Delhi either. Of course, we've got a superb high commissioner there, so Milind Morgan is doing a good job, and I think that needs to be recognized. But the fact is, I would have expected the foreign minister and the president to pay a lot more attention to New Delhi than to the capitals of Europe or to Tokyo, as much as we need to mend fences with Japan, which again were broken because of corruption and Ranil's inability, unwillingness to take any action against the ministers who are being corrupt.
Rohan Pethiyagoda, thank you very much for having considered and given us your time here on Newsline Zoom. We very much appreciate that, and we hope that we will do a separate program and talk about your achievements in the biology part of things, and not on these other things. But thank you very much. We much appreciate your outspokenness and so on. And that's the way it was, ladies and gentlemen, on Newsline Zoom this evening. It's now time for the primetime news. Take care. Have a great evening as much as you can. And God bless you all.